Good morning to all of you. IP world, intellectual property world, as the word innovation is in my judgment being used very freely and by almost everybody. If I take the word innovation, which gets related to the IP fields afterwards, is being used by scientists, engineers, is being used by inventors, is being used by the politicians, is being used by the journalists, media people, and used by everybody for anything and everything that they want to do. The word has become very cheap, very, very cheap nowadays. And the word innovation, if I have to see reality of that word innovation fitting into the usage that is done over here, is a very difficult and complicated thing. In my judgment, the word IP also has been used very liberally, I would say, very, very liberally, and the complications that get associated with the word IP are not understood by many people who use this word IP and IPR and the related things, IPR and related things. I should admit that at the Indian Institute of Science, if I'm talking about 15 to 17 years back, we also were in a similar situations, not trying to understand the whole implication of the IP, the whole implications of the IP world, and what should an academic institutions do about this IP issues, about these IP issues. But then we moved quite a bit in trying to form the IPR policy of the institute, in trying to talk about the implications of this IP, and in trying to talk about the commercialization of this IP over the next 10-15 years, The other thing which was prime at that point of time for us about 15-17 years back, institute is known for its knowledge generation. An institute is supposed to have a knowledge management system. So the other question that we were grappling at that point of time was, is knowledge management same as the IP management? That is another question that we are grappling with. Knowledge management and the IP management. Because the new knowledge generator gets us to the IP. So can we have the same management techniques for this? After a long debate, we came to the conclusion, no. The knowledge management is people-oriented management. And the IP management is a process-oriented thing, and we needed to have different approaches for the management of the knowledge and for the management of the IP portfolio. I think this point was the crux in trying to understand that one is a commercial and a process-oriented subject, the other is a people-oriented management subject, the knowledge management. I always used to tell, so many times I used to tell that an institution like IISc, where I worked for most of my life, is a place which is famous or which is known for converting money into knowledge, in the sense that I get money from government, I get money from DST, DBT, CSIR, or various funding agencies, industries, wherever it is, take that money, work on that money, and convert into knowledge by the processes which I am managing, creation of knowledge. Whereas the other process of getting an IP and then converting that into a business was an entirely opposite direction process. That is converting knowledge into money. And the same institution was having these two processes together. Money into knowledge, knowledge into money, moving in different directions. And always the dilemma that can the same processes of management work for both, or do we need separate processes of management for this? And this was a very important question for us to answer. For us to answer whether I can have the same processes. The answer, at least to us, was no. I cannot have the same processes for doing that, even though the tendency was to use the same processes, because it is the same leader of the institution who's trying to promote both of these activities in the same geographical premises. And that gives us a lot of difficulties, a lot of insights were required into what changes that we need in the management process of these. This is one issue in higher education institutions, which every leader of the higher education institution grapples with. There may be very small things that need to be changed to do both this process management in higher education institutions. The other issues that were coming to us at that point of time also, that there were a lot of misconceptions about IP. Misconception of IP, that IP smothers competition. It smothers competition. That was one misconception that was there about IP. Does it kill competition by these IP pieces? The other question was, IP supports very weird science sometimes very weird science, and not real life science sometimes. The other question was, does IP damage developing countries? This debate continues to go on. And when I was just talking to the Deputy Controller of Patents from Chennai office, he was telling about the drugs and the other related things, which has a consequence to this costing patterns of drugs and things in the developing countries. So does IP damages developing country is another question which has to be debated. These are all debatable questions. Does the IP impede the free flow of information? That is another question to talk about. And does the IP becomes obsolete and irrelevant in quite a few cases? Does it become like this? We debated these things. I'm not going to give you the answers to this question today because of what the viewpoint that we took at IISc on quite a few of these issues, and then proceeded with our processes that we developed at the Institute of Science. We also realized that IP is a negotiable currency, and we have to use that negotiable currency in a very, very correct way. We also realize that IP is a part of the strategic management of the institution or of the organization, is a part of the strategic management, and IP can be a generation avenue of wealth for the institution. Not in the sense that people talk that I'll make 100% of my requirement from the IP and all those things. World figures tell us very opposite things, that hardly single-digit percentage numbers are successful IP which gives into the commercial areas or which gives us commercial benefit. But a commercial benefit, when it comes, is pretty huge, is very, very huge. Stanford is a classic example of this, The other thing is, a IP is also a possibility of using IP to infiltrate new markets, new areas, new territories also. So these were the realizations that came to us. There were the problems that we were facing about the IP, the misconceptions about IP, and also for us to realize that IP is a commercial agreement. Transfer of IP to any organization is a commercial agreement, and there are implications of a commercial thing rather than the implication, not too much implication of IP transfer as an academic or as a subject transfer, which is a small part of it only, The other issues that we grappled with, I'm just putting questions and not giving answers, you must have observed, because answers can be varied. So what answers we took at Institute also were depending upon the different circumstances that we had. IPR in a large lab like the Institute of Science, which today has 42 different departments and 42 different disciplines, starting from the base chemistry, the base physics, mathematics, going on to the sustainable technologies and the Center for Electronics Design and the nanosystems or the electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, the huge range of activities that happen. We had certain special problems for us in the relating to ID. And what were the special problems? One was the diversified technology areas that we had. So if you had one IP office for the whole institute, that IP office had to deal with a patenting of a biotechnological product, patenting of a copyright of a software, or the patenting of a mechanical engineering product or a management process on the other side. Most of the companies which have this type of patent offices, their area of activity is limited to particular group only. Either it is bio, either it is pharma, or either it is electronics and embedded systems or whatever it is. It makes it much easier. For a place like IISc or in similar institutions, we had this diversified areas of activity that was going on, and we had difficulties in the same office managing the patenting of all these different technologies. We need to have a system created of help to be able to handle all these different areas, because it needed different expertise to be able to handle these different areas of technology. Even just writing the claim statement was difficult for us in some areas. Some areas was easier for us to do. So this was one problem of an area of which was problem for us in an institution like Institute of Science. The second problem that we faced was cleverness versus commercial value. The cleverness versus commercial value. The scientists very cleverly, there is a cleverness in trying to do something different, and cleverly he does something different. But the commercial value of this was difficult to estimate, was very, very difficult to either estimate or to tell to others the commercial value. There is a cleverness in the technique, but does it have a commercial value? And that was again a very difficult problem at the institute for us to tackle. The third related problem was the valuation of these new inventions, the valuation of these new inventions. How do we value? How do I value a destructive invention? Or how do I value a process invention? Or how do I value a incremental innovation that I have done and I want to sell it? Most difficult valuation process was us for a destructive type of innovation where we don't have a commercial comparison with other products that I can do in the market. How do I value? How do I value that technology and put it on table for a technology transfer? For how much? I'll just give one example of this. We had one faculty who developed a patent in the IC technology, And this patent was granted. US patent also was granted for this. And having got the patent, there are multinationals who came and showed interest in taking this patent. Start negotiating with these multinational companies. At some point of time of this negotiation, they'll say how much you want for this patent, how much you want for it. And the answer is, I don't know the answer. How much do I quote for this? How much do I start the negotiation point with? And I don't have mathematical modeling for doing this, nor the discounted cash flow methods of trying to arrive at the present value of this invention, nor what the government of India does today to try to take all the expenses that have gone on in creating this particular thing and then add an IPR value to this and quote that particular price. How do I do that valuation? I will probably listen to some of you if we talk on this, but I should admit that we quoted some price and we were not successful with that. We were not successful with that in negotiation with that, and we lost the patent. And the result ultimately was that the multinational bought the scientists rather than the technology. That was the answer that they ultimately get, and they bought the scientists, and the scientists went to that. Along with that went the technology. So how do I do this? This was again one big issue for a lab like this, for an institution like this, on the IP issue. The third issue was that institutions like us have very high-level, world-class academicians who do this. And the syndrome of knowing and not knowing applies to these scientists. The scientists believe that they know everything about IPR also, because they are world-class scientists and academicians. But in reality, they don't know about the IPR issues. They know about the science of the technology, or the science of the technology. But about the IPR, they don't know. But they don't want to say that I don't know about IPR. I don't know about IPR. This is again a very big issue. It looks maybe very simple when I say this, but it is a very big issue to handle in an institution like a large-scale lab like this, handling these people. The fourth point of difficulty was the assignments of the patent. Labs like this have quite a few visitors, have quite a few short-time workers coming, have quite a few people involved nationally and internationally in developing that technology. Now, the assignment of the ownership of that technology, patented technology, was again a very difficult issue in the institute. Everybody for a successful patent would like to get that credit and have that name on that. He may say that, look, I worked for 15 days as a short-term worker on that particular project. I got this particular patent at the end. You had discussion with the international group. I also have a share in the technology development. And how do you handle these things? How do you tackle these things? Was again a very difficult process for us at the institute. The assignability. So therefore, the distinction of the inventive steps and the process steps had to be very clearly done. And the contribution in the inventive steps was to be recognized very clearly, because we cannot leave somebody who has contributed also from the patent, and we cannot include somebody who has not contributed significantly to the invention component of the patent. And in real terms, it is extremely difficult thing to do, extremely difficult thing for us to do. The other issue that we had at the institute was the mining for the technologies that are there in different departments. How do I mine this? So the invention disclosure process in an institution to set up is a very difficult process. It's extremely difficult process. How do I set up the invention disclosure? Companies have these invention disclosure processes. At the IISc, we don't have this invention disclosure. We have more than 200 PhDs coming out every year. We have more than about 300 to 400 master's theses which come out. And then we have faculty who keep on working on so many projects funded by so many agencies and in which work is going on. In all of these, I take the extreme step, there'll be something or other new invented. Or in most of this, there is something invented. Now, how do I get this invention disclosure to my IP office of the institute and then assess that invention disclosure and then take the next step for getting a patent done, or take a call, no, I don't want to pursue this further. But I have to get that invention disclosure. And therefore, this mining of IPR in different labs of the institution was a very, very difficult process for us. If I set up a process by giving some form or giving something else to be written down, everything, does it work in an institution like this with academic freedom? It is very difficult to implement that. It is extremely difficult to implement that. Also, this is difficult for us to get the invention disclosure form filled up and then proceed next with the evaluation of these, invention disclosure. It was also very difficult for us to keep the documentation in the labs correctly. Keep the documentation in the lab correctly for us to be able to prove that this is our invention. There are certain processes which are laid down, which has to be followed in different commercial labs, that you have to have the documentation of what you did today and then get signed by some one or two people, that particular lab sheet or lab book and things like that, and keep this documentation correctly. In an open atmosphere like an academic atmosphere like this, we cannot impose those type of things of what you are doing and how you are doing. This is again a very difficult step for us to get into the IPR in a particular lab. The mining for IPR and the process and the paperwork required for keeping this IPR. The other point that was of concern to IISc at that point of time also was the money portion involved for this. The expense that are involved for, if I have 40 departments, and if I say that every activity is going on has a potential IPR that is possible for me to get from these different activities, more than 800 different funded projects go on. And if 800 funded projects can give rise to 3 or 4 new inventions, then the MTech project, the PhD thesis, everything giving us this, from where do I find the money for doing all these things? So maybe today's workshop, where he's talking about the affordable IPR, will talk, I'm sure, on that particular issue of trying to reduce the costing of getting this IPR and maybe of help. But that issue is that if I have to choose from amongst these different possible inventions in the institute, how do I choose it? How do I choose? I should do some audit. I should have some audit board. I should have some patent board which will evaluate and say, this is thing I can go for patenting, this I will reject. And managing this in a academic institution, commercial institutions, not much difficulty. Decision from the top, you are not getting it, you are getting the IPR, works. But in academic institution, if I say then the answers that will come to me is that you have gone against the mathematics department and you have supported the electrical engineering department. And these are very difficult things to implement in real life systems in this. So the understanding of the IPR audit systems and why and how of the audit system was again an issue that we were grappling with in an academic institution, And the time requirement, which is associated with the money requirement, also was an issue. The academic center, the IP center was headed by an academic like me, and then after me by somebody else, some other persons who come up. And this academic person has his academic work that he has to do. How does he handle that academic work along with this IPR load work? People may give me answers that, look, you should appoint a professional person. You should have a professional person who should be managing the IPR and not a faculty. Well, that has its own implications. And things like that. The last point that we were grappling with at the IISc was also the publication urge and the publication needs of an academic institution. This is always at conflict. The first instinct of a faculty is to publish. And that is his requirement, because his career depends upon the publication he does, his promotions, and these things are related to the publication and the reports or whatever that he does. So the publication urge and the needs of the faculty were always against the IPR needs that are possible in this. How do I do it? Do I do a provisional patent first and within 1 year file the patent? How much do I disclose before I file that provisional patent to outside agencies? These are very, again, difficult things to us to write down and impose it on the faculty. And these are always counterproductive things. And in the second component, having got the patent, to do the technology transfer, or the transfer of this, or the licensing of this IP for any other organization to exploit and come up with products in the market or processes in the market. Again, this being a commercial issue, this being a completely commercial agreement, poses difficulties to institutions like us, to the technology transfer office of institutions like this. And these issues were related to many points. I'll just mention these points. That is the verification portion of the patent, the warranty portions of the patents. I claim something that my patent will do this. The verification process for this to be successfully given to the technology transfer partner is always a question of dispute, The person who takes the technology has something in his head that this is what I will get from this technology. The scientist who is giving this technology has something very high about this technology. He may not be in tune with the requirements of the customer. So how do I verify that this has been successfully transferred? People may say that you write down the process for verification, that these things will happen. Easily said than done. In real life, that doesn't work. It doesn't work. And it has implications on the negotiation that happen. The same thing happens for warranties after the successful transfer is happened. Warranties becomes very, very difficult to negotiate. Is it for more money than the technology transfer fee, or is it in the same fee? It's the same fee that comes. These are all commercial talks which academicians are not very good to do. Then the question is, who is responsible for verification? Is a third party responsible for verification, or is it the scientist and the technology transfer partners themselves? The issue of the acceptance criteria, the issue of indemnity, the issue of further technology minor developments that take place, like in a software, version 9.0 goes to 9.1, 9.2, 9.3. Is it a part of the old patent, or is it something different? What is the point at which I make this a different patent, where it becomes 10.1 or 10.2? Does it involve money? Does it not involve money? How do I negotiate these points? What are the issues of modification rights? How much modification rights do we give to the company who has taken the technology for us? And the financial implications of these modification rights. Who will do the modification? Do the company accept that the scientist will do the modification as required by the market? Up to what level? Up to what extent they will do the modification? For example, we developed a technology for railways. I'm telling this about 2 years back. Developed a technology for railways, tested tested on actual locomotives, ran for 70,000 kilometers, successfully accepted by railways. And now the technology partners for taking this technology are the suppliers to railways. The big players, suppliers, maybe BHEL or ABB or Crompton's or some of these players who are supplying these technology to the railways. Each one of these have their specific requirements of modifications in the technology developed. The question is, in a technology transfer agreement, how does these modifications play? We don't know a priori. So modifications of the technology developed and transferred. For Crompton's, it is one modification. For ABB, it may be another modification. Who does it? Does the company does it? Does the inventor gives this modification at extra cost? Who negotiates for these costs, the modifications and all those things? Then the issues of the associated rights, which may be in terms of geographical area rights, which may be in terms of the technology area in which they can do the application rights. These are all issues that come in commercial negotiations. Then the issues of royalty value changes, royalty and price value changes with modifications. It's a very complex job. Again, a very, very complex job. I tell you why it is complex in public institutions like IISc. In private institutions, it can become easy because there is nobody to question. But in a public institution like the institute, there is an audit sitting on top, which always questions, why only this much? Why only this much? There is a loss to the nation by having done by this much only. You could have got much more. The Colgate, the big numbers always come into that thinking, the losses that have caused by you. I should give an example of what we went through. When we started the first faculty entrepreneurship company at the institute, there was a technology that was developed by the faculty given to the faculty for their company. There was a technology transfer. For this technology transfer, there was a prize which was taken by the institute in terms of equity in that company, No royalty, no down payment, only equity. Now you take X% of equity in the company in lieu of the technology that you have given. And we did get an audit question, why only X%? Why not X plus 5%? Now, how do we explain this? It is very, very difficult. It gets related to the valuation of the technology issue and the negotiation for this equity rights that you have, So these issues, again, become very difficult for a public institution, institutions like us. Now, the issues of protection of the technology is, again, difficult issue. The issue of support and maintenance given. How much time support? 1 year? Or for how much time? 5 years? The company expects for lifetime the inventor will keep on supporting this technology at no extra cost because it is his technology. But the institution cannot do this because there are costs involved. The support and maintenance issue. The term and the termination contracts, when the termination clause affects, and the terms for these terminations, and how does it affect. This is again a commercial negotiation. For an academic to do all these things, it becomes an extremely difficult job in a public institution. I didn't talk too much on this, on all these points, but what I was trying to say is that an educational institution like institute, from where I come, we have to grapple with the issues of first the IP management, IP creation, and then IP getting it patented. Next, having got it patented, there are issues related to transfer of this technology and handling the transfer portfolio, the portfolio of patents to be transferred. And all these issues to be handled by one person, one office, and in diverse fields, of that particular lab becomes an extremely complex problem for us to solve. Having said all these things at the institutions, we did something. We did go through this. We set up 10 companies of entrepreneurship for the faculty. We did transfer technologies of different types to different people, and we did increased our patent portfolio at the institute. But if you ask me honestly, probably we could have got much more than what we did. Because the restrictions that were posed on us were quite a few. Now, in a system like this, and for an educational institution that I'm talking about, if I need support, if the educational institutional needs support on all these different facts or the facets of the IP generation, IP registration, and IP exploitation, if I need, probably companies like this which work on some components of components of these IP area, complete IP area, may be useful in the future is what I feel, may be useful in the future. And this may be useful for many other small players who cannot afford this type of developments can become a useful tool, one more useful tool available for the people to look at and try to see whether I can do what I want to do at a lower cost. Last point that I wanted to touch upon today was that I took the specific example of the Institute of Science, IISc, and then I gave you the experience of what we went through in these three aspects. But today I go to various educational institutions, to many universities, many higher educational institutions, and they do ask questions to me about the IP subset of the institution's work. Because the vision of a higher education institution, which was at that time only teaching, it got changed to teaching and research. That was the second vision statement, the second academic revolution. And then it got changed in the second academic revolution to teaching, research, and partake in economic development. So if I include that as a part of the educational institution's vision, partake in economic development processes, then I enter into these fields of technology, licensing, IPR, copyrights, and all various things, continuing education and different fields that I'll come into. And they ask the question that how do I fulfill that particular requirement of this vision, economic development partaking vision? Obviously, the answers are complex to give because answers for every institutions are different, depending upon their strength, their weaknesses, their geographical locations, and the other leadership factors that we see at this institution. But this question needs to be answered to every higher education institutions now. And I hope that in this workshop, which is limited to what we call as the affordable IPR only, probably we'll expand it a little bit more to talk about the different aspects of IPR for higher educational institutions and their implications on their working, Thank you very much for listening to me patiently, which some may feel was out of the context of the subject of this affordable IPR, or which some may feel that this was a part of that particular subject in the overall construct. I leave the judgment to you, and that probably will be reflected in zero number of questions coming for me at the end of this at the end of my talk. Thank you very much for your patience.